Having surpassed 1,000 completed anime, it's time to review my old favorites and find out what holds up. I'm Sacrabolic, your envoy of hope, and this is Anime Favorite Search. The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya is a movie that chronologically takes place at the very end of the anime timeline, so after both of the original two seasons, and starts off with Haruhi deciding that the SOS Brigade are going to basically have a big old Christmas party. And then, the day after that's decided, Kyon wakes up, and none of the members remember him. Class 9 is gone, Itsuki and Haruhi are missing, Asahina doesn't remember him, and Yuki remembers him but completely different, and also her personality has completely changed from her normal, phlegmatic, almost like robotic feeling to what is now a sort of like demure, mousy girl. I say she's demure or mousy, but interestingly enough, she does seem to have a pretty big crush on Kyon, and she's actually, in her own way, sort of forward with her feelings. She doesn't like come out and say them. She's very like reserved and skittish, but she like invites him back to her house, and when he tries to leave after a mystery guest, who I will allude to, enters in, she ends up like dragging him back. Not like literally, but it's like this cute little thing where she grabs his sleeve. Yuki's fucking adorable in this movie, and I do really like what I will call alternate timeline Yuki. Regardless, the big issue is that Haruhi's missing, and Kyon eventually gets a message from the more traditional Yuki Nagato saying that if he gathers all of the keys, he can end the situation, but he only has 2 days to do it. So I'm not going to get too much into the spoilers of the rest of the movie because I think this movie is fucking fantastic. This is my absolute favorite anime movie of all time. And yeah, I don't really want to ruin it because it's also sort of a fucking iconic ass film, if we're being real here. So I'm just going to give you like the taste with that sort of preview. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we can dig into with this. For example, when the reveal at the end happens, I think it's very interesting that the Yuki Nagato of this world has feelings for Kyon even when her memory's gone. And I wonder if there is a sort of implication there, and I think there actually might be, that the regular version of Yuki Nagato has feelings for Kyon that perhaps develops during the course of like Endless 8 throughout the course of the series. And I think that does sort of explain why she tends to listen to him and to defer to his judgments. Granted, everyone in the SOS Brigade actually defer Kyon over Haruhi secretly, because everyone is aware that Kyon has special influence over Haruhi, and also Haruhi is a deranged lunatic person. But yeah, this also sort of adds a sort of secondary layer, which almost implies that Yuki has complex feelings for Kyon that she doesn't quite know how to handle, and I would argue in this film definitely boil over. And interestingly, we also get the sort of implication that Itsuki has a sort of thing for Haruhi, which I don't find particularly surprising. But I am willing to bet that whatever information would be conveyed in this movie is probably canon to the main timeline. There isn't like the most amount of evidence, but considering the main difference between the disappearance timeline and the main timeline is just the absence of supernatural powers, I do feel like this sort of aligns itself pretty well with what would be like a main timeline on that. Regardless, it's very hard for me to review the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya for a few reasons. Number one, I've always been better at saying what something does wrong than does right, so this is just sort of outside of my wheelhouse in the first place. But for the second thing, what the disappearance does, probably the best, is it is structured as just a really solid movie. Like, you could go scene by scene, but there really isn't any point to doing that because every scene basically contributes to either some sort of emotion that the characters are having or some idea that later comes back or some sort of development of the character. And in order to like address everything that happens, I would just be explaining the entire movie. There's not really a point to do that, especially because I'm trying not to get super into the spoilers. And what is interesting about this is we do manage to get a lot of callbacks to like earlier on parts of the series, and it basically sort of explores like every character in its own way. Like we come back to all of them. because we have scenes with Itsuki, Haruhi, Asahina, Yuki, obviously, but even the sort of like side characters like Kyon's friend and Asahina's friend, and we even have an extra mystery character I don't really want to give spoilers on, which I find is absolutely fascinating that that character appears in this, and I think it has a really interesting indication of Yuki's psyche, that that character is here, and I think, without getting into too many details, I actually think it's really interesting how well kept this timeline was. So even though there is, and it turns out to be an escape to the timeline, I think there is a certain inherent part of the timeline that is resisting change and really reveals a sort of conflict in the creator in this. And so I think Disappearance does a lot of things that are really good, especially with its characters, but it's also just got a lot of good shots, and it has really excellent pacing, is the thing. Like, what the movie does well is, of all of the TV anime movies, this is the most a movie. Like, a lot of movies, when TV anime tend to get movie adaptions, it's usually they just, like, compress a really long arc into a singular film, whereas The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya functions as its own standalone movie. Like, as long as you know the general concept of Haruhi, you could probably just watch this by itself, and it functions like you would see with a sort of like a Ghibli film or a Satoshi Kon film or a Makoto Shinkai. Like, it's not like in their style, but it is definitely like a film. Like, the fact that this is like just cut out from a light novel arc is not apparent in the structure of the movie. It's very solid fundamentals. And that's part of what makes it hard to do this sort of review for Disappearance, is just being like, look how well structured this is. Oh man, I certainly love that pacing. Like, it's hard to like point out individually what the movie does well, because it kind of just does everything well. And I would have to say that if you get together a movie where you explore a bunch of characters that have already been established, that you already like, and you sort of show different sides to them that you wouldn't normally show, you have plenty of ups and downs, you pace the movie well, you structure it well, you direct it well, it looks fantastic because this is fucking Kyoto Animation. If you do everything well, then you come out with a great movie. And that's part of what makes it hard to review, because how do you say, well, it did everything right? So I don't know what to say. So I guess the best place to end this on, without getting too bogged down in the minutia, is The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya is the best anime movie I've ever seen, and that's all there is to say about that. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye!